The air in Cambridge was crisp, with a sharpness that hinted at the end of fall. Golden leaves fluttered across the yard of Harvard University, like tiny forgotten stories, carried by the wind and trampled beneath shoes far too busy chasing the future. Inside the grand memorial hall, anticipation brewed like a storm. Students shuffled in wearing sweaters and pride, eyes scanning for someone they only knew from headlines and history books. That someone was Sundar. Pichai, the CEO of Google, was visiting Harvard to give a special guest lecture. The event had been arranged quietly, with limited publicity, to avoid a frenzy. Still, the room was filled beyond capacity. Even those who didn't care about tech or innovation wanted to witness the quiet man from India whose voice had once cracked during his first interview, who now led one of the most powerful companies in the world, but among the sea of curious minds. So one young man who wasn't there to learn or admire. His name was Connor Whitmore. Connor was a senior in computer science. Tall, sharp-jawed, and arrogant in the way only someone from 3 generations of Harvard alumni could be. His grandfather had a building named after him. His father had donated $500,000 to the school's AI lab. Connor believed he was born to lead not just companies, but conversations, classrooms, and the future itself. He had a plan. A quiet one. Not loud, not cruel. Just ... Calculated ... He intended to embarrass Sundar Pichai. Not with insults. Not with disrespect, but with intellect. Connor believed Sundar didn't belong at the same intellectual table as the students of Harvard. He saw him as a business executive, not a mind. A manager, not a thinker. And that day, he intended to expose him gently, publicly, and with a smile. The puzzle sat neatly folded in Connor's bag. It was something he'd created himself. An advanced logic, problem disguised as a harmless brain teaser. Simple on the surface, but designed to collapse anyone who didn't have a deep grasp of mathematical theory. Computer science and a little bit of chaos theory thrown in for flair. He imagined how it would go. Sundar would read it during the cue in a session. He would pause, puzzled, maybe laugh it off. The room would chuckle. No harm done. But the seed would be planted. Maybe Sundar wasn't as brilliant as people thought. The room fell silent as the doors at the back opened. A man in a dark blue sweater and black slacks stepped in quietly. No entourage, no spotlight. His walk was calm, almost invisible, like someone used to being overlooked. But the moment his face appeared, the energy shifted. Sundar Pichai smiled gently as he walked to the podium. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't deliver a booming speech. Instead, he talked like he was speaking to a small group of friends in a living room. He shared stories of his childhood in Chennai, of waiting weeks for a rotary phone to be installed in his home, of touching his first computer at age 20-1. He spoke of failures, how he didn't get into the IT he wanted, how he struggled with English when he first moved to the US, how he once got laughed at in a college debate because of his accent. And yet, here he was. The students leaned in. His honesty, humility, and quiet confidence wrapped the room in silence. Even Connor felt the flicker of doubt. But he brushed it off. Words were easy. This wasn't a test of intellect yet. Sundar talked about innovation, how ideas evolve, how good leadership is often invisible. He shared how some of Google's biggest products came from quiet engineers who never wanted credit. Just the space to think freely got an hour past, like 10 minutes. Then came the cue and a hand shut up. Sundar answered each question patiently, thoughtfully. Students asked about artificial intelligence, data privacy, the future of search. One asked how he handled pressure. He smiled and said, "You breathe through it. Sometimes it's all you can do." Then it was Connor's turn. His hand rose with the calm confidence of someone who believed he owned the room. Pichai, Connor said, standing up. "Thank you for your time. I have a little puzzle here. Nothing serious. Just something fun. I was wondering if you'd take a look and maybe walk us through how you'd approach it." A few heads turned. Some students looked intrigued. Others sensed something off in his tone. Sundar nodded, unfazed. Sure, he said gently. I'll try. Connor handed over the folded sheet. The moderator brought it to Sundar. He opened it and read silently. The room waited. Sundar tilted his head slightly. His eyes scanned the page again. Then again. The pause stretched. Then he did something that made Connor's stomach twist. He smiled, but not the polite kind of smile. It was a knowing smile. The kind you give when someone thinks they've locked a door, not realizing you built the house. This is clever, Sundar said, lifting the paper. A layered logic trap with recursive steps disguised as a standard sequence problem, he added. It mimics a paradox, but isn't one. The trick is in the phrasing. It's meant to mislead the solver into thinking it's a contradiction. He looked up at Connor. Did you design this yourself? Connor nodded, stiffly. Very good work. Sundar said, now let's solve it together. And then he began step by step. He walked through the layers of the puzzle. He didn't just solve it, he unpacked it like someone carefully unwrapping a fragile gift. He explained where the red herrings were placed, how the question tried to trigger instinctive but incorrect responses, and how by slowing down and reframing the problem, it could be understood clearly. The audience was dead silent. Sundar finished solving it in under 5 minutes. He set the paper down and looked at Connor again, not with smugness. Not with superiority, but with something deeper. Kindness. Thank you for sharing that, he said sincerely. This kind of thinking is what keeps innovation alive. Connor nodded, but his ears were hot, and his chest felt like it had collapsed into itself. Students around him whispered. Some smiled, some didn't know what to say, but Connor felt it. The very thing he had wanted to plant in others' doubt was now growing inside himself. After the session, people gathered around Sundar. Not like fans, but like students around a teacher who had made them feel seen and heard. Connor stayed in his seat. Then something strange happened. A woman with glasses and a notepad approached him. She introduced herself as a reporter for the Harvard Crimson. That was your puzzle, wasn't it? She asked. He nodded. Mind if I ask why you gave it to him? Connor hesitated. It was just for fun. I thought it'd be interesting. She tilted her head slightly. Interesting that you gave him a trap, and he turned it into a lesson. Before he could respond, she had already scribbled something down and walked off. Connor felt sick, not just because Sundar had solved the puzzle, but because he had done it with such grace, with no desire to humiliate or prove anything. In trying to make Sundar small, Connor had revealed the smallness in himself, and it wasn't over. 2 days later, an article appeared in the Crimson titled, When Humility Outsmarts Ego, Sundar Pichai, and the Harvard Puzzle. The piece didn't name Connor directly, but it described the incident in enough detail that everyone on campus knew, and that wasn't even the worst part, because a few days after that, Connor received an email. It had no subject, just a single line. Thank you for reminding me that we're all students, no matter where we sit. It was from Sundar Pichai. And beneath that quiet sentence was a line that would haunt Connor for days. If you're free this week, let's talk. I have a few puzzles of my own. Connor stared at the screen. His hands trembled slightly. Was this an invitation, or a challenge, or something else entirely? He didn't know, but he was about to find out, because what came next would change. Not just his perception of Sundar Pichai, but his entire future. And not everyone would be ready for what Sundar had planned. Connor didn't sleep that night. The email from Sundar Pichai sat like a heavy stone in his inbox, unread for hours after he first opened it. He kept staring at the screen, reading the line over and over. Thank you for reminding me that we're all students, no matter where we sit. Those words didn't scold him. They didn't mock him. But somehow they pierced deeper than any criticism could. They wrapped around his chest like a question he wasn't ready to answer. He finally replied at 3:14 a.m. I would be honored to meet with you, sir. I'm available anytime. He hit send, then sat frozen in his chair, wondering what he had just stepped into. By the time the sun rose over Cambridge, Casting golden light across the brick walls of Harvard, Connor felt like a different person. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even guilt. It was curiosity. He had tried to expose Sundar Pichai as an average thinker in a clever disguise, but now he couldn't stop wondering how deep Sundar's mind actually went. The reply came just before noon. A simple message with a location and time. Meet me at the Baker Center Library. Room 3B, 2 p.m. today? No need to dress up. Connor stared at the clock. He had less than 2 hours to prepare. But for what? He didn't know. He thought about wearing a suit, then decided against it. Instead, he put on a black sweater, jeans, and sneakers. No pretension. No games. He left his laptop behind and took only a pen and small notebook. Part of him felt like he was walking into a storm. Another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this meeting would become the most important moment of his life. He arrived at the Baker Center 20 minutes early. The building was mostly empty. Students were in class or lounging outside, unaware that something quietly extraordinary was about to unfold inside room 3B. He climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing louder in his chest than in the halls. When he reached the door, it was already ajar. He knocked softly. A voice inside replied, warm and calm, come in. Connor pushed the door open. The room was small, lined with old bookshelves and 2 chairs set near a narrow window. Sunlight filtered through, falling in soft beams across the table where Sundar Pichai sat, sipping coffee from a plain paper cup. He looked up and smiled. Connor, he said, thank you for coming. Connor stepped in quietly, unsure if he should sit or wait. Please, Sundar said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I appreciate your message, Connor said, voice more nervous than he expected. I meant it, Sundar replied, setting down his cup. We're always learning. Even when we think we're teaching. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was spacious, patient. Sundar leaned back slightly, studying Connor not in a judgmental way, but in the way a mentor might study a student who's just on the edge of discovering something vital to share something with you. Sundar said, but first, may I ask a question? Connor nodded. Why did you give me that puzzle? The words hit harder than expected, but not because they were accusatory. They weren't. Sundar's tone was gentle, his expression curious, open. Connor hesitated. Then he exhaled, slowly. Because I thought you weren't as smart as everyone says. I thought if I gave you something tricky, something you couldn't solve, it would, I don't know, prove that even big names can be fooled. Sundar nodded slowly. That's fair. Connor blinked. It is? Yes, Sundar said. Because it's honest. And honesty is rare, especially when ego is involved. He paused, then added, I've been underestimated my whole life. Not because I was incapable, but because I didn't look or sound like the people others expected brilliance from. Connor lowered his gaze. Ashamed. But Sundar leaned forward slightly. I want to show you something. He said. From a small leather folder on the table. Sundar pulled out a sheet of paper. He handed it to Connor. On it was another puzzle. It looked simple. Almost childish. A sequence of shapes, numbers, and arrows. Nothing about it screamed complex. No equations. No advanced symbols, just patterns. Like something from a grade school workbook. Connor looked up, confused. You want me to solve this? Yes, Sundar said, but not now. I want you to take it with you. Spend some time with it. Maybe a day. Maybe 3. Solve it only when you've stopped trying to look clever and started trying to understand. Connor furrowed his brows. What does that mean? You'll know, Sundar said softly. Or you won't. Either way, the lesson is in the trying. Then Sundar did something unexpected. He stood up. Not in a rush. Not dismissively. Just naturally, as though the meeting had served its purpose. Thank you for meeting me, he said. Offering his hand. Connor stood and shook it, though 1,000 questions flooded his brain. Wait, Connor blurted out. Is that it? I mean, why me? Sundar paused at the door. Because you're smart, he said. But more importantly, because you still believe that intelligence is about showing off. Someday, you'll learn it's about seeing through things, not just past them. And with that, he left the room. Connor stood frozen for a long time. He looked back down at the paper. A puzzle. But not just a puzzle, a message. A challenge. Nearer. He took it home and stared at it for hours. At first, he tried to brute force it. He made charts, scribbled on whiteboards, even ran it through a few basic algorithms just to map the structure. Nothing worked. He didn't get closer. In fact, the more he tried to solve it with logic alone, the more it pushed back. Like a lock that clicked shut each time he tried a new key. By day 2. He was exhausted. And then something strange happened. He stopped thinking. He made tea, sat outside, watched the wind rustle the trees. And for the first time in days, he stopped trying to prove something. He just looked at the puzzle. Quietly. Not as an opponent to defeat, but as a message to hear. And something shifted. He saw it. Not the answer, but the beginning. The pattern was emotional, not mathematical. It was about rhythm, not logic. The shapes corresponded not to numbers, but to emotions. The arrows weren't transitions in space, but transitions in time. It was a metaphor. And once he realized that, the whole puzzle unfolded like a poem written in a forgotten language, simple, elegant, invisible to those rushing through it. By the end of the 3rd day, he had the answer. More than that, he had a realization. The puzzle wasn't about solving it all. It was about slowing down. About letting go of ego. About seeing the world not as a race, but as a riddle with meaning, hiding beneath its silence. He emailed Sundar that night. Subject: I solved it. Message: but more importantly, I think I finally understand what you meant. He didn't expect a reply that night. But it came. This time, it had an attachment. A calendar invite, a one-on-one private session with Sundar Pichai at the Google offices in Mountain View. No audience, no press, no students. Just a meeting. Connor stared at the screen. This wasn't about puzzles anymore. This was an invitation into something far bigger. And far more dangerous. Because what Sundar would show him next, what he would be invited into, was a world that few ever got to see. A world behind the curtain. A place where ideas weren't just born, they were shaped, tested, and set loose to change everything. Connor accepted the invite. But deep down, something in him stirred, a mixture of excitement, fear, and awe. Because the man he had once tried to embarrass was now about to become his teacher. And teachers, like Sundar Pichai, didn't just give answers, they rewrote the entire question. Connor had been to Silicon Valley before. His father once dragged him along to a conference when he was 16, thinking it would inspire him to become a startup founder like so many others in their social circle. He remembered walking through those glass buildings, feeling disconnected, like everything was too clean, too distant, too artificial. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't just a tourist with a name badge. He was invited by Sundar. Pichai. The moment he landed at San Jose Airport, a black car was waiting at the curb with his name on a placard. The driver greeted him politely and said nothing during the 30-minute ride to Mountain View. Through the window, Connor saw the world passing by: tech campuses, cyclists, trees swaying in the late afternoon breeze, and with every passing second, his heart beat louder against his ribs. As they turned onto Charleston Road, the massive Googleplex came into view. It wasn't a fortress like some imagined. It was open, colorful, playful even. Bikes in rainbow colors lined the pathways. Workers in hoodies and sneakers strolled between buildings or sat outside with laptops under shady trees. The car pulled up in front of a quiet side entrance, not the main one tourists visited, but something more discreet. A woman with a kind smile stood waiting by the door. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked. "Please follow me." She led him inside through a maze of softly lit hallways. Everything felt casual but intentional, walls filled with sketches. Whiteboards scrawled with equations, silent rooms humming with ideas too early to name. It didn't feel like a corporation. It felt like a living brain. After several turns, They reached a door with no label. She knocked once and opened it. He's expecting you? Connor stepped inside. The room was nothing like he imagined. No massive desk. No intimidating decor. Just 2 chairs, a coffee table, a wall of books, and Sundar Pichai in a gray sweater, seated cross-legged with a notebook on his lap. He looked up and smiled. Welcome. Connor offered a nervous smile in return. Have a seat, Sundar said. I hope your flight was smooth. Yes, thank you, Connor replied, settling into the chair opposite him. The silence returned, not empty, but dense, full. Sundar studied him for a moment, then placed his notebook on the table. Do you know what the real purpose of puzzles is? Yes, Connor shook his head slowly. It's not to solve them, Sundar said. It's to study how you behave when you can't. Do you grow impatient? Do you cheat? Do you give up? Or do you sit with discomfort long enough to learn something deeper? Connor listened, heart pounding. There's no judgment in Sundar's tone, just curiosity. When you gave me that puzzle at Harvard, Sundar continued, you thought you were testing my intelligence. But what you were really testing, without knowing, was my patience. He paused. And now, I want to do something different. Not to test you, but to invite you into something most people never get to see. Connor sat up straighter. Come with me, Sundar said. They left the room and walked together down a corridor that seemed quieter than the rest. At the end of it was a small door with a badge scanner. Sundar tapped his card, and the door clicked. Open. Inside was a lab unlike any lab Connor had seen. Not in size, but in energy. The room buzzed with soft noises. Monitors glowing, screens flickering, prototypes half-assembled, strange devices sitting in silence, like secrets waiting to speak. There were only a few people inside, each immersed in something that looked like a cross between science and magic. This, Sundar said, is one of our internal research spaces, off limits to most visitors. Connor stepped slowly inside, unsure if he was even allowed to breathe too loudly. These are not products, Sundar explained. These are questions we haven't answered yet. Ideas too young to explain to the world. Some of them won't work. Some are decades away from being real. But all of them are built by people who aren't afraid to look foolish. They stopped in front of a glass display table. Inside, it was a small device that looked like a watch, but with no screen. What is it? Connor asked. A silent assistant, Sundar said. It doesn't talk. It doesn't beep. It learns your habits by watching your rhythms. It doesn't try to interrupt you. It tries to understand you. Connor stared at it, fascinated. But we won't release it, Sundar said. Why not? Because we haven't solved the ethics, he replied. We don't just ask, can we build it? We ask, should we? That answer struck Connor harder than he expected. He had always imagined tech leaders as ambitious visionaries racing to outbuild each other. But Sundar was showing him something else, a way of thinking that wasn't driven by dominance, but responsibility. They moved to another table. On it was a wall of questions written on post-it notes. Each note had a different color, a different handwriting. Questions like, what does silence teach us that sound can't? How do you design for someone who can't speak? How do you measure dignity in an algorithm? Connor's eyes widened. We hold weekly sessions here, Sundar said. No laptops. No slides. Just questions. Anyone can speak. Even the interns. Especially the interns. They walked on. One prototype looked like a piece of jewelry. Another looked like a paperclip. A third was nothing but light on glass. And yet, none of these were shown to the public. None had been leaked or shared or praised. We don't always need applause, Sundar said softly. Sometimes the work is the reward. Finally, they returned to the quiet room. Sundar sat back down. Connor followed, mind spinning. What you saw today, Sundar said, is only possible when ego is left at the door. No matter how smart someone is, if they're more focused on being right than doing right, they'll fail. He paused, then added, You're gifted, Connor. But the world doesn't need another person trying to be the smartest in the room. It needs people who can make others smarter. Connor sat in silence. Those words landed somewhere deep. I don't know if I'm ready, he said quietly. No one ever is, Sundar said. But the fact that you're here means you've already taken the first step. Then Sundar handed him another folded paper. Connor took it slowly. What is this? He asked. A final puzzle, Sundar replied. But not one you can solve. With formulas, this one, you'll have to live with for a while. Connor opened it. It was a story. Not a question. Not a riddle. A story unfinished. About who built something beautiful. But no one noticed. About how he almost gave up. About how one person saw it and everything changed. Last line read, what the boy did next determined not just his future, but the world's. Beneath it were 3 blank lines. Connor looked up, confused. Finish it, Sundar said. When you know how it ends, come back. Connor stared at the page. His hand shook slightly. Sundar stood. It's been good talking to you, he said. Warmly, they shook hands again. But this time, Connor didn't feel like a student shaking a teacher's hand. He felt like a traveler being handed a map to places he never knew existed. As he walked back through the halls of the Googleplex. Past bright murals and quiet minds at work, he realized something that nearly stopped him in his tracks. He had come here to judge. To challenge. To prove something. But now, he was leaving with a burden far heavier than failure, the burden of responsibility. The responsibility of knowing better and choosing better. And for the first time in his life, Connor Whitmore didn't feel like the smartest person in the room. He felt like someone standing at the edge of a cliff with a choice to either turn back or take the leap. What lay at the bottom. He didn't know. But Sundar believed he was ready. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The plane ride back to Boston was silent. But Connor's mind was louder than it had ever been. The cabin buzzed with quiet conversations and the occasional rattle of coffee cups, but all he could hear were Sundar's last words echoing and finish it. When you know how it ends, come back. He looked down at the paper in his hand. Sundar's puzzle wasn't really a puzzle at all. It was a story, a mirror, a dare, a challenge so invisible, most people wouldn't recognize it as one. 3. Blank lines waited at the bottom, mocking him and inviting him at the same time. How do you finish a story about someone else when you're still trying to figure out your own? He folded the paper gently and placed it back in his notebook. The return to campus felt unreal. Harvard looked the same: grand buildings, busy sidewalks, students wrapped in scarves and ambition, but Connor no longer felt like part of it in the same way. He had seen something behind the curtain, something quiet and rare. He had stood inside the beating heart of the future, and now he was back in a world obsessed with grades, titles, and appearances. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had got Connor skipped most of his classes that week. Not out of rebellion, but because something inside him was shifting. He started spending hours at the library, not reading textbooks or cramming for exams, but reading essays, memoirs, journals. He read about people who created movements, who built things no one believed in, who changed the world, not by shouting louder, but by listening deeper. He also revisited his own work. He opened the code base of a project he had abandoned months ago, an app designed to help autistic children communicate using soundless visuals. Back then, he dropped it because it hadn't gotten attention during a pitch night. No applause. No praise. So he moved on, choosing something flashier for his portfolio. But now he looked at the app differently. He remembered something Sundar said in the lab. Some of the most beautiful things are invisible to the market. He spent nights rebuilding the code, not to impress, not to win, just to make it better. During those long hours, something unexpected happened. His classmates noticed, not because he posted about it. He didn't, but because he had changed. He asked better questions in class. He stayed behind to help undergrads struggling with their assignments. He started showing up to office hours, not to complain about grades, but to understand why he got things wrong. He even smiled more. Not the fake kind he used to wear during networking events, but real, quiet smiles that came from a place of peace. Professors started asking him what had shifted. He gave vague answers. just thinking differently these days. He'd say, but one day, someone didn't accept the vagueness. Her name was Mia. She was in his AI ethics seminar. Quiet, observant, always writing in a notebook, but never speaking unless asked. They had barely spoken all semester. But one afternoon, as they walked out of class, she fell in step beside him. You're not the same guy who tried to show up Sundar, Pichai, she said, without even looking at him. Connor froze for a moment. Was it that obvious? He asked, half smiling. No, she said. But I watched your face when you solved the puzzle. You looked like someone who just got told the truth for the first time. He chuckled softly. Yeah, that's pretty much what it felt like. They walked in silence for a moment. Do you know why I never speak in class? She asked. Connor shook his head. Because everyone else is too busy performing, she said. They're not listening. They're trying to win something that doesn't even exist. Connor looked at her for the first time, not as a quiet student, but as someone who had been watching the world more clearly than he ever had. Maya, he said, can I show you something? She raised an eyebrow. He opened his notebook and showed her the folded paper, the unfinished story. She read it slowly, then looked up at him. This isn't about the boy, she said. This is about you. I know, he replied. Have you finished it? Not yet, he whispered. She nodded. You will, when you stop asking what you want from the world and start asking what the world needs from you. Those words haunted him. In the best way. Over the next few weeks, Connor did something that surprised even himself. He revived his app not just as a project, but as a mission. He renamed it Echo because it didn't speak, but it reflected. He formed a team, not the smartest or most popular kids, but those who believed in it. Maya joined. So did a freshman coder named Liam and a design student named Rachel. Together, they worked late into the night, testing, tweaking, improving. They reached out to real families, therapists, and special needs educators. And the feedback was overwhelming. A mother cried during a demo. Her son had used the app to express a feeling for the first time in weeks. He tapped 3 symbols. Me, sad, alone. Then one more, hug. She hugged him until he laughed. That night, Connor opened the folded paper again. He stared at the last line of the story. What the boy did next determined not just his future, but the world's. He picked up his pen. For the first time, he wasn't writing to impress. He wasn't writing for Sundar. He was writing the truth. He wrote. He kept building, not because he wanted to be seen, but because he had finally seen. He gave away what he made because it was never his to keep. And he stayed quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he wanted others to speak. He set the pen down. His heart felt strangely full, not with pride, but peace. He scanned the page and sent it back to Sundar with no message, just a subject line, the last 3 lines. He didn't expect a reply, but one came. It wasn't an email. It was a handwritten letter. Sundar's writing was elegant, simple, just like him. To read. Connor, you've finished the story not with words, but with your life. Now, let's begin a new one together. S. And folded inside the letter was a plane ticket. Destination. Zurich. A handwritten note on the bottom said, we're building something global. I want you to see what it looks like when minds from every continent sit at the same table. Meet me there. Connor's hands trembled as he held the paper. Zurich. Seat at the global table. Not because he solved a puzzle, but because he learned how to listen. And he had no idea, none at all, that what waited in Zurich would shake his very idea of the world. And force him to choose between comfort and a cause that could cost him everything. Asterisk. The plane descended into Zurich under a blanket of soft gray clouds, the kind that made the sky look like it was quietly thinking. Below, snow dusted the rooftops and nestled between winding streets like a secret the city didn't want to give away. Connor sat by the window, his face reflected faintly in the glass, heart pounding with anticipation, nerves, and something else he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. It had been only 2 months since. He gave Sundar the last 3 lines. 2 months. Since he stopped chasing applause and started listening to the quiet things that mattered. Now, he was being called into something bigger, Something global. He didn't know what to expect. The ticket simply said Zurich, arrive by Thursday, details to follow. No meeting room, no agenda. No name tags or schedule. Just a feeling that this trip wasn't about being impressed, but being changed. Outside the terminal, a sleek electric car waited for him. The driver greeted him with a polite nod and little else. There was no limo, no paparazzi, no red carpet. Just silence and snowfall as they passed through narrow streets, past Gothic spires and old cafes. After 20 minutes, the car pulled into the entrance of an old building, stone walls, wooden doors, ivy climbing its sides like the fingers of time. It didn't look like a tech hub. It looked like a monastery. And in a way, it was, because inside that building, some of the quietest minds on earth were shaping the loudest future humanity had yet to face. As the door opened, Sundar was waiting. He smiled, warm and familiar, dressed in the same simple style sweater, slacks, kindness in his eyes. Welcome, he said. He made it. I wouldn't miss it, Connor replied, stepping into the warm air of the stone corridor. They walked together down a narrow hall, lit by soft lamps and lined with portraits, not of executives, but of thinkers, artists, and rebels. Names he recognized. Others he didn't. All of them had challenged something. What is this place? Connor asked. We call it the threshold, Sundar said. Threshold of what? Truth, Sundar replied. And choice. They arrived at a wooden door marked only with a circle, drawn with no break. Inside. The room opened up like a whisper turning into a symphony. A round table made of oak and glass sat at the center. Around it, 12 people, men and women of every background, scientists, engineers, poets, and activists. No one spoke. But everyone looked at Sundar as he entered. He nodded at each of them, then turned to Connor. This, he said, is what the world doesn't see. Connor stepped closer, heart racing. Sundar gestured to a chair left empty just for him. We don't meet to build products, Sundar said. We meet to ask questions. Questions too dangerous, too early, or too complicated for press releases. He continued, in here there are no companies, no politics, just people trying to make sure the next step humanity takes doesn't crush something sacred. A woman with silver hair leaned forward. And you, young man, she said, with a soft accent, have already taken that step. Not by knowing answers, but by asking better questions. Connor swallowed hard. He didn't feel worthy. But he felt seen. Sundar sat down and opened a black folder. He pulled out a single document, no more than a page long. This is what we're here to discuss, he said. He slid the paper across the table to Connor. The title read, Synthetic. Empathy Initiative, Phase 1 Deployment Draft. Connor blinked. Beneath the title were a few bullet points. Neural learning models trained on emotional tone, not content devices designed to detect unspoken distress in vulnerable users' prototypes. Tested with refugee children and patients with speech trauma. Projected release. 3 years. Looked up. You're building machines that can feel? Not feel, Sundar corrected. Recognize, support, not replace human care, but extend it. Another man at the table spoke, his voice deep and slow. The challenge is not technical. It's moral. If we build machines that understand pain, what happens if those machines are bought by people who cause pain? Connor felt a chill run down his spine. We're not deciding how to do this, Sundar said softly. We're deciding if we should. And just like that, Connor understood why he was here. Not to code. Not to lead. But to question. He spent the next 6 hours in that room, listening, contributing, asking. It wasn't a meeting. It was a battle of conscience. Some believed the technology could save lives, give voice to the voiceless, detect trauma in children who couldn't speak, prevent suicides before they happened. Others warned of the risks, governments weaponizing empathy, corporations mimicking care to increase sales, emotional manipulation at scale. Then in the middle sat Sundar, calm, thoughtful, never steering too hard, just holding space for the storm. As the sun set outside, and the room glowed with lamplight, Connor finally spoke. Maybe the question isn't should we build it, he said quietly, but can we build it in a way where those who need it most get it first, not the loudest, not the richest, but the most forgotten. The room fell silent. Sundar nodded, slowly. Then that becomes the puzzle. He said dot, and for the first time, Connor saw it, not just the future, but his place in it dot, not as a prodigy, not as a tech star, but as a bridge between brilliance and humility, between speed and wisdom. After the meeting, Sundar walked him through a quiet garden behind a building got snow, dusted the bushes. Their breath fogged in the cold. Why did you really invite me? Connor asked. Sundar stopped by a frozen fountain. Because you reminded me of who I used to be, he said. Ambitious, impatient, trying to prove something to people who already forgot my name. He turned to Connor, but then he did something. I never had the courage to do at your age. What's that? He changed. Connor's eyes stung unexpectedly, not from the cold, but from the warmth of being told the truth. What happens now? Connor asked. Sundar smiled. Now you go back and decide what story you want to tell with your life? Connor nodded slowly. But as he turned to walk away, Sundar stopped him. There's one last thing, he said. He handed Connor a small envelope. Inside was a single ticket. Back to Cambridge, along with a handwritten note. Someone else just gave me a puzzle. 1, 2. Big for me to solve alone. Your turn now. And below that, an address. The Harvard Innovation Lab. Connor stared at it. His next chapter was already waiting. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the story wasn't about puzzles anymore. It was about power. And the people fighting to control the future. We're already watching. Asterisk. The plane touched down in Boston just after midnight. The city lights blinked beneath a curtain of fog, and the runway lights painted soft trails across the wet tarmac. Inside the cabin, most passengers were asleep or lost in their screens. But Connor sat upright, alert, the envelope from Sundar still clutched in his hand like it might vanish. If he let go, the last few weeks had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. From the moment he handed Sundar that puzzle at Harvard, driven by pride and the desire to impress, something had been unraveling inside him. And now, after Zurich, after the circle of minds who questioned the future instead of racing toward it blindly, he was no longer the same boy who used intelligence as a sword. He was something else entirely. Maybe not wiser. But gentler. More awake. He left the airport in silence and walked through the dark campus. Snowflakes melting against his jacket, the only sound the crunch of his shoes over gravel. He didn't call anyone. He didn't tell anyone he was back. This journey had started in silence, and it felt right that it should return there. The next morning, he went straight to the Harvard Innovation Lab. He had been there many times before. It was sleek, modern, buzzing with students pitching startups, polishing slide decks, chasing ideas with sharp teeth and sharp suits. But today it felt different. He wasn't there to pitch. He wasn't there to be heard. He was there to listen. The address Sundar had written led him to a smaller annex in the back, one most students ignored. The silent door simply said, Initiative Room B. He knocked gently. A woman opened it, early 30s, short hair, kind eyes. She wore no badge, no title. You Connor? She asked. He nodded. I've been expecting you, she said with a knowing smile. Come in. Inside. The room was warm, softly lit, no projectors, no stage, just a circle of chairs, most already filled. Students, professors, and a few older faces that didn't seem tied to the university at all. On the whiteboard. At the front, someone had written 4 words. Who controls the narrative? A professor spoke first. We're being asked to build tools that can shape public opinion in real time. Algorithms that adapt messaging based on emotional feedback. A student added, there's pressure from certain donors to design systems that promote certain ... perspectives. A third voice, calm but firm, said, what begins as persuasion often ends as control. Connor sat, breath held. He had walked into a storm. Not one of machines, but of morals. These weren't discussions about code or performance. These were debates about conscience. And somewhere behind these soft-spoken debates, there were powerful people watching, not just business leaders, not just politicians, but investors, advisors, gatekeepers of the digital age who believed that empathy could be monetized, that truth could be programmed.